Guy America here to talk about a pretty serious subject. It's something I've considered a couple times in my life, and I'm seeing quite a bit of posts on it on the social medias. And that subject is deciding to commit suicide when life starts to get tough. Now, before I get into this post that inspired me to make this video, I want to talk about the first time I seriously considered ending my life back in my mid-20s. Now, back then I considered myself an atheist, so I didn't believe that anything happened to us after we died. The couple people that I was really close to ended up passing away when I was younger, so I think the anger from that was why I didn't believe in a higher power. So I became an expert at distracting myself from thinking about them, but those losses never really made me suicidal. What broke me was several years of waking up early 5 or 6 times per week to bust my ass so a bunch of people I've never met could have their freedom. Then I broke up with my girlfriend, and she later told me I got her pregnant, and if I didn't start supporting her, she was gonna move to another state so I'd never see my kid. The money I was making wasn't enough to support a family, so I began using my credit to try to start a business, but that ended up being a terrible idea. So long story short, DNA for the kid she had didn't match me as the father, and the state won a predatory lending case against one of the lenders I borrowed from. And all this was before the Card Act of 2009, which was an attempt by our government to prevent credit card companies from trapping people in debt, which is still going on, by the way, and it's actually what inspired me to start creating content. I made the mistake of trusting my government and thought deceptive lending was illegal now, so I used my credit cards again to try to help my father when he had a stroke. And after he passed away, I worked 2 full-time jobs to help pay off my credit cards and also distract myself from thinking about it. Now, during this time, I was also helping my mom take care of her 10-acre property, which would take me 40 minutes to get to and around 6 hours to mow. All this hard work really started taking a toll on my body, so after I was debt-free again, I decided to quit my job to sell my mother's property and move her down the street. Now, I decided that thinking I could just get jobs again to pay off the credit cards, but it took over a year to do everything, and the job market was not the same anymore. I spent over 3 months applying for jobs and only got 2 interviews during that time, but I'm almost 50 years old now, so I have a hard time getting out of a chair, and I think that's why I didn't get hired. It's like the whole right side of my body is going out on me now. My shoulder, hip, and knee all flare up, but I do anything over 20 minutes, so I started getting really depressed not being able to find work. And on top of all that, my property taxes kept increasing every year, so I decided to try and move to another county to bring my cost of living down and see if I could find work there. But the only house I could afford needs a lot of work, so the plan was to stay with my mother while I tear the property down by her to use the building materials to fix up my new house. Then my car breaks down, so at this point I figure my only option is to declare bankruptcy and apply for disability. But the bankruptcy attorney I met with seemed to get a little too excited about the idea of me becoming homeless, so I decided against that. Apparently in my state, these credit card companies that justify charging high interest rates by claiming it's unsecured debt can actually secure the debt with our homes if we don't have kids. But at this point, I'm still thinking on paying the interest rates I saw in bold when I signed up for the cards that I always paid off every month for years. Once I finally found the time to sit down and add up the almost $40,000 that I paid in interest, I also figured out that every credit card raised my rates to over 20%, even though I had a perfect payment history. Boy, I tell you, I've never been that angry before in my life when I figured that out. And I admit I'm a little ashamed of what I started thinking about these people that are doing this to us. I wondered my whole life how entire nations could come together and justify mass murder, so I did some research on Nazi Germany, and it turns out usury was the common theme in their propaganda. So one could logically argue that what these credit card companies are doing to people is not only immoral and bad for the economy, but it's also quite dangerous. I'm a pretty firm believer that we're all products of our environment, so maybe the best way to prevent another genocide is to try to figure out a peaceful way to stop these debt traps. After reading some about how Hitler thought, he doesn't strike me as a very intelligent man, and it seems like our leaders are getting dumber and dumber, so it's really kind of scary to think about. So that is where my mindset is at when I started thinking about suicide for the second time. And again, it was mostly from the stress of figuring out how to dig myself out of the hole I was in. So not only was I struggling with the loss of my father, I also lost all my faith in the idea that the government was here to protect us. The first time I thought about suicide, I had to figure out a higher power that made sense to me, and that formed my faith that gave me a feeling of purpose towards life. But it's really hard to keep that faith when you can't find reasons to trust your government at a time in your life when you need it the most. My disability got denied, and that happened around the time the billions of dollars of fraud for refugee programs is being exposed, so that was quite upsetting for me. Now, I don't blame refugees for any of that, but I do think we should take care of our own first before we start importing other people that need assistance. I also think maybe we should be putting off programs to colonize other planets when we can't even figure out how to take care of all the people on this planet yet. So needless to say, there's a lot to be depressed about, and I struggled with it for months. I would break down and start crying when I would try to talk about my situation, so I can understand why the person who posted this kept hanging up after calling 311. He explains that he's been homeless for 9 months and that it was the fourth time he's been homeless since 2021. So I can't relate to what that's like since I have family to fall back on, but I do know how miserable it can be dealing with bugs on hot days. I would imagine not having anywhere to go to get away from those bugs would be enough to drive anyone mad if they're exposed to that situation for too long.
Yeah, that sounds like some bullshit.
You got that right, dawg. The poster goes on to explain how their physical state led to a mental breakdown, and I can relate because I swear I started losing my mind when I had no idea what to do to get back on my feet. I could tell my memory was getting worse, and I started having a really hard time understanding things that I normally wouldn't even have to think twice about. I think a lot of my mental problems mostly had to do with not being able to sleep due to pain from getting older and constantly worrying about becoming homeless. Now, as I said before, I do have family to support me, but they have plenty of their own problems to deal with, so that's why I was considering suicide again. I've always been independent and in a position to help others, but almost every time I tried, just made me feel like I was being taken advantage of. So it got really depressing thinking I was doing that to people I cared about, but I just couldn't figure out how to support myself since I couldn't find work that I could do with my body going out. I eventually got a computer set up in my ma's place, and I'm learning how to use AI to make videos, so that has given me a little hope that I'll be able to make at least some money. And I tell you what, that little bit of hope made all the difference. They can actually sleep at night, and I haven't thought about suicide for a while now. I think humans need their independence, because I noticed that most people that depend on others seem to resent them for it. I remember feeling pretty annoyed by my mother when she used to do everything for me in my teens. So I think that's why we start fighting back at a system when it feels like it's too corrupt. Humans have a pretty consistent history of the working class rising up when they don't get what they need to survive. And I think it's safe to say that the data is showing that that is becoming the case more and more as AI and robotics take over the workforce. But that topic is where I actually found my faith and started having hope for a future again. One of the things that anyone with any intelligence should realize if they go back and study history is that life gets easier and easier with every new generation. So maybe our workforce becoming automated is going to wind up becoming a good thing for all of us. If you really think about what happens if automation takes over, the only thing that will work is if we all own the technology that runs our economy. It should be common sense that money will become worthless if only a few people have it, and there's no question that the wealth gap is widening faster than historical averages. And for the wealthy people arguing against this, that's proof right there that you don't need to be that smart to make a lot of money. You just have to be willing to keep failing until things work out, and also put yourself out there until you find yourself in the right place at the right time. And I can assure you that going through all that is no walk in the park, so I understand why the people that actually built their wealth can get so defensive when people question their work ethic. But the bottom line is that the economy is not sustainable unless it works for all of us, so we need to figure out how to make it do that. And that brings me to the whole point of this video, which is to try to convince all of you considering suicide and not give up right before the good part. You are not alone, and there's nothing to be ashamed of if you're having a hard time figuring out how to get by during a system collapse. And I know things look bleak, but almost everything in nature is formed out of chaos, so I invite you to embrace that concept and join me in throwing a bunch of shit at the wall until something sticks. Content creation seems to have a promising future, and it might just be the closest thing we have to a basic income system, so that seems like the best place to start. So if you're someone that's interested in coming up with peaceful solutions to our problems and you don't insult others for thinking outside the box, please join our community. Who knows, maybe one of your ideas will help get us out of this mess we seem to be stuck in and change the future.
If you don't subscribe and hit that like button below, that's some bullshit. Squirrel!